I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a bit fanatical about crows. They're by far the most nuanced birds that I've ever spent time with. They have complex habits and language, and I don't say this lightly, but I think that some of their behavior is, well, it's ritualistic. It's dusk right now, and we're in a wetland out in a suburb of Seattle. This wetland is where many of Seattle's crows, thousands of them, come each night to roost, and we want to see it happen.
Oh, there's a bunch of them on the ledge over there.
Do they like hang out and go fun?
That is a lot of crows.
They're not even going anywhere. They're just
The sky is now black, full of crows, masses of them swirling and dive-bombing each other and doing barrel rolls.
There are like tingles in my body.
holy
Today on Here Be Monsters, we're going to be talking about crows, birds that live beside us nearly everywhere on the planet, birds that harass us and eat our trash, and birds that just might be able to teach humanity a bit about the origins of intelligence and emotion. Here Be Monsters, the podcast about
an exaggerated face.
the podcast about
The unknown. Known.
Crows had always been intriguing to me because they just seem like they're paying so much more attention.
This is Kaylee Swift. She's a graduate student at the University of Washington in Seattle. Her research is attempting to parse out the complex relationships that crows have with humans.
It's hard to describe. People who like crows are instantly familiar with that experience of just feeling like they're watching you back. You just don't get that feeling with many other wild animals, especially birds.
While crows are far from the only species to watch humans, they are somewhat unique because of just how good they are at it. And to understand why, we've got to rewind almost 10 years back to a study that took place here on the University of Washington campus. Do you have the caveman mask here?
Yeah.
In this office?
No, it's downstairs in my lab.
downstairs. It was almost a decade ago, back in 2006, when Kaylee's academic advisor
I'm John Marsloff. I'm a professor of wildlife science at the University of Washington.
bought a cheap caveman mask on the internet. Here.
Okay.
We don't have time to go downstairs and look at the caveman, do we?
Sure.
Oh, we do.
I can see who's...
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Today, the caveman mask lives in a basement storeroom, almost like a dungeon, to punish it for the things it's done to the birds on this campus. It sits on top of a display case with its orangish skin, its wide nose, its protruding teeth, and thick eyebrows.
Here's the caveman. Caveman's a really distinctive and exaggerated face.
One day in February of 2006, John put on the caveman mask and started walking around the heavily forested campus. He was carrying a net, and eventually he found a crow. He snuck up behind it, and he threw the net over top of it. The net didn't hurt the bird, but crows, like almost every animal, don't enjoy being trapped.
We band them, weigh them, measure them, let them go. We did that with 7 birds while we wore the caveman mask. We thought they might associate that face with that experience.
And they did. 2 days later, John put the mask on again and walked around campus, and the moment a crow saw him, it reached deep into its crow vocabulary and gave John a loud scold.
A scold is a harsh, easily localized vocalization that...
Can you make the sound?
Sure, I can make the sound of it. It's basically...
But that crow, the one that was scolding John, it wasn't one of the 7 that John had caught 2 days before. It must have watched what had happened from the trees above and watched as John took another crow hostage. and by scolding, it was loudly saying to the other crows in the area, it was saying, look at this caveman. This caveman is dangerous, just like a hawk or a raccoon or an owl. It's dangerous, and tell everyone else. And now, years later, John can still take this mask, put it on, and walk around campus, and find himself surrounded by angry crows.
That mask hasn't done anything for 8 years, but the birds on campus still respond to us like we're a predator, like we had, killed these birds or threatened them with bodily harm. We didn't kill any of them, obviously.
Cacophonous aggregation is the scientific term. It's very descriptive scientifically. I personally prefer to use the term funeral because it conveys a much clearer message.
Today, Kaylee is taking John's research one step further. She wants to figure out what is going on inside the mind of a scolding crow. So she is looking into a related behavior. It's the strange and powerful response that crows have when one of their kind dies. It's called a cacophonous aggregation. It's the crow's death ritual, the crow funeral.
A crow funeral is an event where you have a bird who discovers a dead crow, and it will vocalize and recruit other birds to the scene. They will produce the scold call, caw, 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 caw. And they'll be flying around in the trees. And for about the next 10 to 20 minutes, those birds will produce that harsh scold sound. Sometimes there's a prolonged period of silence where they're just observing. And then after a certain period of time, they'll all disperse.
But there's a problem with observing crow funerals. You see, even though there are tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of crows living in Seattle, predicting where and when a crow funeral will happen is nearly impossible. So, with the help of some human volunteers and a taxidermied crow, Kaylee is making the funerals happen, manually.
So what I'm holding is a stuffed crow. The wings are sort of splayed out as they might be if it had died rather than tucked closely into the body. But you can see it has sort of those awkward, the way the wings are positioned is not something you would typically see of a healthy bird or of a living bird. Today is Friday?
Indeed.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. You would be Michelle.
Oh, Michelle.
This is Michelle. Yes, who I never had the fortune to meet as an actual person. So now she just lives on in my mind as the enemy of crows.
Kaylee is standing in front of me here on this busy street in central Seattle. She's holding a clipboard and she's describing the face I'm wearing.
Michelle's face is one of our more petite masks. Her lips are a little bit turned down. She's got a fairly almond-shaped face. Petite,
this mask is nothing like the exaggerated caveman. Michelle was molded from a real person and looks realistic enough to a careless passerby.
And then your personal eyes will be showing, so they'll be able to see your real eyes. Yep. What we're going to be doing, I'm going to give you the dead crow. You're just going to be holding the bird parallel to the ground. So just vary your gaze. Crows are attentive to human gaze.
As Kaylee gives me my instructions, I'm concealing the dead crow, hiding it in the plastic grocery bag. Kaylee walks over to a spot on the sidewalk and drops a pile of crow food, aka peanuts and Cheetos. She's been baiting these crows for 4 days, teaching them to show up here at a certain time for free food, so we have a guaranteed audience. Kaylee then nonchalantly recedes into the distance with her clipboard. I make my way over to the pile, slowly navigating as my vision is reduced to slits by the mask. Each time I exhale, I can feel the warm moisture of my breath trying to find an escape route from under the mask. The judging eyes of passing motorists and joggers burn into me as they go by. I'm wearing a sign around my neck that flaps in the wind. It reads, University of Washington, Crow Study. And I look down at my mark on the sidewalk, next to the pile of Cheetos and peanuts, and I lift up the plastic bag, peel it off and hold the light, soft body of the taxidermied crow parallel to the ground and slightly uplifted like an offering. And I wait for the first crow to notice the bird that they will think I've just killed. My mask here serves two purposes. First, it's teaching the crows that Michelle is a dangerous person. Regardless of what human fills the mask, the crows will remember Michelle's face. The second reason isn't immediately apparent, but becomes obvious as several crows begin flying over to me. They're perched directly above, sitting on the power lines and scolding me in a way that is almost certainly the bird equivalent of pissed off yelling. And my initial distaste for the mask is suddenly replaced by a relief that my true identity is hidden from these crows. The scolding from the first crows that found me attracts other birds, and as I look at the power lines now, I can see that there are a dozen or more birds flapping around up there, looking at me and squawking loudly, and I can't help but wonder what exactly is going on up there in those 12 large brains.
What do you think is happening? Like, what is going on at a crow funeral?
Well, that's the central question of my research. I don't know the answer yet. It seems what the data is suggesting is that it's danger learning. It's an opportunity for them to learn more about their environment, and we know from other studies crows are doing a lot of that all the time. Now, that's not mutually exclusive with some kind of emotional response.
But saying that an animal is emotional, or even grieving, well, that's messy for a lot of reasons.
One of the challenges with studying animal emotions is you can't ask an animal what it's thinking. And I will not say whether or not I think that's what's happening. John and I have had this debate.
I think in some situations, some individuals, yes, they have the neurotransmitters, the chemicals in their brain that make them feel grief like we feel grief. They have the places in their brains like we do that would allow them to respond in the same way we do to grief. So I don't know if crows grieve. I will never know that because I can't talk to them. But I could look at their brain function and brain chemistry and see, is it the same when they see a situation like that as when we see one? And if they're the same, then I think you can conclude they're grieving.
Is it the same?
I don't know. We haven't done the experiment. I'd like to do it.
When you do the experiment, which you are planning on doing later this summer, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And if it comes back and it does look like, just to a T, the same sort of reaction that humans have when they're experiencing grief and loss, would you feel comfortable saying it then?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would. Not everybody would agree with me.
If you come out and you say, like, and your name's written on the paper and it says crows are almost undeniably grieving,
right,
are you going to get flack from some of your peers?
Probably not so much from my peers, not so much from biologists. The place I'll get flack is more likely from human psychologists who would claim that you just don't know unless you can have the conversation with them and talk to them about how they're feeling about something. And that's a valid point. I mean, it's a valid point. It's a valid point. It's a valid point.
So, while that conversation with crows is impossible, John is doing his best to find the workaround. Right now, he's capturing more crows, a different set of crows from the caveman experiment. He's capturing them and then taking them down into the basement of the University of Washington Hospital, where he places them in a brain scanning machine. He then presents them with the lifeless body of a bird, and then watches the brain scan to see just how similar the crow response to grief is to ours. It's an impossible question, but hopefully John's brain scans will give us some preliminary answers. But for the moment, what we do have is the real world, here on this busy street, and what I have is a dozen angry crows, sitting on the power lines above me, conducting a cacophonous aggregation. Or maybe it is a funeral.
A challenge to me as a scientist who is also a human being is recognizing that when I'm observing and making interpretations about the natural world, I'm limited by my perception as a human. And I have to keep in mind that animals experience and interact with their environment differently than we do. And there may be ways in which they're experiencing that are invisible to us. And so when they're conducting these funerals, there could be experiences, knowledge, or sensory input that we are just unaware of. So as a scientist, I never rule out the possibility of that sort of mystery.
So in all this stuff, this thing that I keep getting hung up on is this idea of spectrums, right? Because on one end of it you have danger learning, what we know the crows do. They find something dangerous like a predator or a cheap caveman mask, and they learn to ostracize it and fear it and maybe even hate it. And then on the other end of that spectrum you have this human response to death, which we as humans view as highly sophisticated and nuanced, with our coffins and our urns and our sky burials and our funeral pyres and our gods and our afterlives and the special music and all of this, all of it is intrinsic to what we see as human culture. But that blindness of the human perspective that is so intrinsic to our study of animal behavior, well, it's a knife that cuts both ways. Because just as we are blind to the experiences of other animals, our anthropocentric perspective also obscures us from fully understanding our own emotions and rituals. And so the question that needs to be asked is whether or not the ends of this spectrum of experience are inherently separate, whether these words that we've been talking about, words like emotion and grief and sadness, should always be prefaced by the word human, or whether they stand on their own.
How Old Mr. Crow Lost His Double Tongue by Thornton W. Burgess. Blacky the Crow sat in the top of a tall tree and seemed trying to see just how much noise he could make with that harsh voice of his. Caw, 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 caw. Peter Rabbit peered out from the dear old briar patch and frowned. If I had a voice as unpleasant as that, I'd forget I had a tongue.
This episode of Here Be Monsters was produced by me, Jeff Entman. Big thank you to my brother, Brian Entman, who first turned me on to John and Kaylee's research. Also, many thanks to David Kestenbaum of NPR's Planet Money, who was instrumental in the production of a much shorter version of this story that's coming to a radio station near you. In the sequence at the beginning of this episode, you heard from my two friends who biked out to the crow roost with me, Nora Gunning and Sam Capilotto, aka Lieutenant Dungarees and the Sturgeon General.
From KCRW, this is Here Be Monsters.
All right, so we have to go up and through. It's a beautiful park, actually. I've never really seen a picture of him that I believed was, if not classically beautiful, then he was striking and very active, very strong, and certainly not someone who you can ignore.
That is Steve Schenken. He used to write history textbooks for kids, but he doesn't anymore. We went for a walk, and I asked him to tell me everything he knows about Benedict Arnold.
Average size, but very muscular. And he was always jumping over things and lifting things. And a wonderful ice skater. It's said that his calf just looked fabulous in a stocking. Great legs, you know.
All I ever learned about Benedict Arnold is that he was the biggest traitor in American history. He was an American who switched sides and sold out to the British Army. He betrayed his country, our country. But Steve Schenken doesn't see it like that, or not exactly. He told me that back before the betrayal, Benedict Arnold was a decorated Major General, and he won us a crucial victory in the Revolutionary War. It was the Battle of Saratoga, here in upstate New York, where we're walking up this hill. And it was here at this battle where Benedict Arnold was shot in the leg, and it was an injury he'd never fully recover from. This battlefield from the Revolutionary War is one of Steve Schenken's favorite places, and he wants to show me something up these hills that's hiding in plain
From the independent producer project of KCRW, this is Here Be Monsters.
Back in early 2014, I bought a bunch of tape recorders and blank tapes. I packaged them up into little shoe boxes and I mailed them across the country and across the world to a couple dozen of my friends and acquaintances. I asked them to keep the tape recorders by their bed, and then each morning, first thing, flip them on and speak their sleepy recollections of their dreams into the recorders.
My name is Rebecca Williams.
My name is Allison Baxter Loves.
Grace Woods.
Micah Kruger, June 18th, 2014.
So I mailed these tape recorders out about 2 years ago, and every once in a while when I open up my mailbox, I'll find a new tape, and I pop that tape in a tape recorder and I play it back, and sometimes it's meaningless and sometimes it's profound. I've always loved dreams. Dreamland is this place where the laws of physics and the laws of nature and the laws of government are overrun in instants by the whims of the subconscious. And until now, these dreams have remained in my personal collection of audio. But today on Here Be Monsters, I want to share with you some of these dreams, a small collection of my favorite trips to Dreamland. Be Monsters, the podcast about
A box of junk?
the podcast about
the unknown.
Okay, so I think my dad and my boss went on a date, and we're generally enjoying each other's company, and that was super awkward. My dad got married yesterday, so maybe he's just in my brain, but that was the weirdest shit ever. It was real weird.
So my boss at my current job, like my boss's boss, told me that I needed to go sell these like things to raise money for our organization. She showed me the box in it of stuff that I was supposed to go door to door and sell, and it was just like a box of junk, like random pieces of like crap, like little pieces of plastic, like from like old toys and stuff, all mismatched. Like they were things, but they were like pieces of games and stuff that no one would want. And she made me walk up to the top of this cul-de-sac, and it was like a super long uphill walk, and I got to the top, and there was these houses up there, and then there was all these like beautiful like men that were all like, they looked like they were like really hard workers, like they'd just gotten off work, and they were all just like stunning and like, well, like intimidatingly stunning, and they just looked so real and like so raw, like they could see through me, and like they knew that I felt so stupid because I had to come there and try to sell them these little pieces of junk.
I got this sunburn on my legs. I kept peeling at it, and all these huge chunks of my skin were coming off, and it was really disgusting, and all this like crazy pigmentation differences between the sunburned parts and the non-sunburned parts. And it was coming off like the layers of hard-boiled egg. Couldn't try to peel off the shell, and like the bottom, like kind of softer part just comes off with it. And it was, for some reason, I agreed to babysit this Indian American couple's baby for a few days, and we were just completely neglecting it and trying to change his diaper, but his diaper was made out of towels, and we was trying to pretend that we took good care of the baby. I mean, nothing happened to it, but I think they were on to me, and they knew that it wasn't really taking care of the baby that well.
I was swimming in a river with two other girls who I knew in the dream, but I don't know who they were here. And we were diving down deep to the bottom of the river, and then they grabbed me and were trying to hold me down.
Last night I had a dream that my roommate got a jet ski.
I just had a dream about brushing my teeth with mayonnaise.
Okay, so I'm in this house, and I want to say I was with Lynette, maybe. I come in and she's smoking a cigarette, and she doesn't smoke, so I'm like, why are you smoking a cigarette? It's really weird. She's like, I didn't mean to, I didn't want to. And I just get this sense that this cigarette just kind of forced itself on her. It's half smoked, and she's trying to like throw it down. And then a hand kind of appears out of the air holding this like half smoked cigarette next to her. She's like on the ground, kind of laying down, and it like travels up through her body, like from her anus into her mouth and out, and like lights itself.
I dreamed of a small town on the Olympic Peninsula, one old Victorian house in particular. During this time at this house, I felt as if I was experiencing many years in the house, but sometimes I was the young boy in the family hundreds of years ago or so. Sometimes I was that boy grown up, living in the house alone. Sometimes I was that same person, but a woman. Sometimes I was a visitor to the house who became the companion and lover of the resident I just mentioned. And then sometimes yet I was myself, accompanied by Alexandra, visiting the house as the house was a hotel, yet experiencing the memory of the house as we stayed there. It was sort of the life of this house.
I'm locked inside a really large square concrete tower. It's like the largest on the planet. And there's nothing that exists outside of it. It's made from all the concrete in the world. The staircase spirals in a square shape, up and up, in a clockwise manner. I'm walking up it, and it's so stark, and I think about how nothing could grow here. I can't get out, so I just keep going upwards. And then I begin hearing things, sounds of humans, and then I come to a balcony where there's children, and the children live here, and they are working and playing and taking care of each other, and they're growing here in this concrete tower on this balcony. And I watch them for a long time, and I think about how in this tower these are wild things.
Boarded an airplane in Washington State that was supposed to be headed to Ireland. And this plane was surreal. It was distorted. The rows were 30 people long. So, I mean, this plane would have held thousands of people. As we made our way toward Ireland, we had 20 or 30 stops in small cities. We were stopping in mall parking lots and on highways. At one point during the flight, I looked out the window. I saw this city that was completely made up in my mind from like nothing I'd ever seen before. Buildings that were so beautiful. The city was made of glass, beautiful metal and gold, big spirals. And the buildings were these beautiful blues and greens and pinks and purples. And they were, in the dream at least, they were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And the sun was shining off of their off their sides. And as I was looking at that beautiful city, the plane had started to descend way too fast. And I remember looking around, and not everyone had realized that. And for a moment, I was really afraid. I had a moment of realizing I was probably about to die. And I kind of just had to control that and take a deep breath. And then I just felt this complete and total peace with myself and my fate. And I remember crying just like a single tear as I looked out this window as the city was rapidly approaching the plane. And I wasn't crying because I was about to die, but I was crying because we were about to destroy something so beautiful. Alright, I'm gonna try and get back to sleep.
This episode of Here Be Monsters was produced by me, Jeff Entman, along with help from Bethany Denton and our editor at KCRW, Nick White. So this project with the dreams and the tape recorders, I'm calling it the Dream Tapes Project. And while it's something I really care about, unfortunately between my day job and this podcast, the Dream Tapes Project is something that often gets neglected. There's just
this dream, like when I woke up this morning, it took me a while to remember it, even though I knew I was just dreaming, because it was more like there's like this dream world and then the real world, and I wasn't having a specific dream. I was just inhabiting that world, and then when I woke up, I was inhabiting this world. I don't know if that makes sense, but I wasn't doing anything specific. I was just living my dream life, and I'm now living this physical life where suddenly everything is like kind of hard around the edges. Instead of being kind of flexible, because also in the dream you can change things, and things change by themselves, and you don't really question it. That's just how it is. You don't even think about questioning it, because it's just how it is. There's like different rules. Yeah. I don't really remember any parts. But I don't know, it felt like it was really long to get involved. I was just there, you know. Yeah.
This is really jumbled together, and I don't remember some pieces of it, but the gist of the dream was that I think my dad and my boss went on a date and were generally enjoying
I'm in some, like, maybe African or Middle Eastern country, sort of deserty, a lot of foliage, dusty, definitely like a poor, like a town without a lot of infrastructure, no roads or anything. It's all like dirt roads. And I'm like packing up for a trip. And I start out with this like suitcase. It's like clear plastic, like that kind of pleathery plastic stuff. I guess it'd be like vinyl or PVC or something. And then the thing is like, it kind of looks like a bedside table where it's got like a drawer on top, and then the bottom is kind of like a zip open suitcase steel, and then it's on these like plastic wheels that they put on the bottoms of like filing cabinets. And I'm packing for a trip, and then I have to get to the station or wherever it's the place that I'm catching my ride. So I'm riding on top of this suitcase, and at first it's like big. It's almost like wagon sized, like covered wagon. And then as I'm going, it's kind of hard to steer. I sort of have to lean, like whichever way to steer the thing. So I kind of like almost run into walls. But then I'm able to kind of redirect it. But as I go, it gets like smaller. It's not that I'm like aware that it's shrinking. It's that it kind of like all of a sudden got smaller, and then now here I am sitting on this like ridiculously small, kind of squishy, hard to steer, and I'm sitting on it, and I'm going really fast, and I fall over and I crash it. And I realize that I can't travel on it like that anymore, because it's not solid enough to travel at that highest speed.
This episode of Up and Vanish contains graphic and sexually explicit content that is not suitable for children. Listener discretion is advised.
Keep right on Mystic Highway. In half a mile, arrive at Asilla.
That's it right there. Right there. That's her house? Yep. That's her house. This is, because you pictured it in your head. This is not at all what I pictured. It makes you feel like, yeah, you could definitely disappear in this area after dark. How remote and random is this place after dark?
Ten years ago today marked the last time anybody reported seeing or talking to Tara Grinstead.
Officially, police are calling this a missing persons
GBI
case.
officials say investigators
Latex gloves found in $80,000 reward is being offered for information.
is Tara Grinstead?
From Tenderfoot TV in Atlanta, this is Up and Vanished, the investigation of Tara Grinstead. I'm your host, Payne Lindsay. Hey guys, there's several ways as a listener you can support the future of this podcast. First, subscribe, rate, and write a review on iTunes. Need Last month, the streets of Osceola were packed with people for the 57th annual Sweet Potato Festival. Hundreds of civilians gathered in celebration as a parade marched through the downtown streets. It was on this same weekend, 11 years ago, that Tara Grinstead disappeared.
We knew something was wrong immediately. She was not the kind of teacher that would not show up without alerting somebody.
We was expecting her to pull up any time and say, "What are you guys doing at my house?" But that didn't happen.
I think about Tara virtually every day, and I certainly think about her when October comes around.
For now, time stands still. Grinstead's friends, family, the town still held captive by the unknown.
For many people in Irwin County, this weekend brings back painful memories. That fateful night on October 22nd, 2005, would haunt this community for over a decade. Tara's missing poster still hangs in front of the police station. It's now faded and hard to read, but Osceola is still holding on for an answer. In the last episode, Maurice had called me with a new lead. He told me about a man who committed suicide in Knoxville, Tennessee. The man also wrote a letter, and it said he couldn't live with himself any longer because he knew what happened to Tara Grinstead. The letter also listed 12 people's names.
This has to be very sensitive because I have been dealing with a distraught family for 2 months. And that family, and just one person from the family, the rest of them are so still distraught that they refuse everything. And they were mad, really, in the beginning. That's the reason why I'm telling you, Payne. It's very, very, very sensitive, man. It won't take but a little swift, and the whole family and everything would absolutely put a stop to it.
He stressed to me that this was a very sensitive situation. This was not a rumor or hearsay. A real person committed suicide. Out of respect for the grieving family, I was asked not to say his name in this podcast. It's a very confusing and eerie story, but I'll do my best to explain it.
He lived in Fitzgerald, but he went to Irwin County, and because it's right there on the line, a lot of people do that. He would have been 31, 32 now. So 10 years ago, he would have been 21 or 22. He was an avid fisherman and an avid hunter, too. This came to me by an anonymous, somebody created a Gmail account about 2.5 months ago or more. I don't know who sent it to me, but it was a female, and she wasn't from Osceola. She was from Tiffin, and she was in college when this happened. She dated one of the guys whose name was on the list. This is new information, but this individual wrote a letter and said that he couldn't live with himself anymore, and that he knew what happened to Tara. Those 12 people were hauled in by the GBI, and they were all swabbed. But see, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. There's no use to search the internet. There's nothing, just one obituary, that's it, but there's nothing in the internet about this. For one thing, he killed himself in Tennessee. He's from Fitzgerald, but there's nothing in the internet about any of it. Other than obituary, there's nothing on the internet about his suicide. So the question is, did he do it? Well, no, he didn't. What it is that he was threatened. He was threatened, and he saw something that he shouldn't have seen. He was actually threatened. He had told family, see, he didn't say who, but he was threatened, and it's either two things. Either that, and he saw something, or there were a group of them. See, you could have 10 people standing around one or two people harming somebody, and you could list those 10 people's name in a letter and swap them, and you won't get any hit.
The suicide note didn't give any details about what happened to Tara. It just said that he knew what happened, and then he listed 12 people's names. The letter was given to the GBI, and they brought in all 12 people for questioning. They also got a DNA swab from each individual. Maurice was saying that even though these people's DNA presumably didn't match the glove found in Tara's yard, it didn't really mean anything. He's saying if there was a group of people involved, and they were all standing around watching, then their DNA wouldn't be on the glove anyways.
The main thing is none of the families have the note. Now, the GBI has the letter. So I've submitted a records request for that letter to GBI. I made the argument that none of this was tied to Tara case. So I don't know if they'll buy it or not, but I want a copy of the letter. Tennessee law is, if something is an active investigation or open, you don't get it, just like Georgia. But the thing is, they don't have the letter in Tennessee. I've already confirmed that. They've got the original letter. GBI has it. And that's what they pulled the boys up on.
Just like Georgia's record law, Tennessee doesn't have to give us the letter either.
You have to deal with the family, see, because they're still hurting after 5 years that he killed himself. He was he went to Georgia for 1 year, and then in 2009 he was an honor student at the community college there. He was a pretty good guy, it seemed like. I said there's about 4 or 5 people I don't have the names on. I have 5. They're all 01 or 02. All of them had Tara as a teacher. None of them were 05. They were all 01 and 02 or 03 graduates of Irwin County. I don't have the letter. I just know that the 12 individuals on the letter, they were all swabbed.
The source that gave him this information only told him 5 of the names on the list, so we're still missing half of them, but it's still a good start. Maurice was able to contact one of the names on the list, and he told me about their conversation.
I've talked to one person that was on the list. The question that I asked this individual was this. I said, why do you think you were listed on here? He said he doesn't know. I mean, the family doesn't know why these people were on the list. And I asked him. He said he doesn't know. That's what he said he doesn't know. I said, well, what did the GBI say? He said, well, they mentioned about the glove and the DNA in the glove. And then they asked if any of us had had sex with Tara. So I don't know the source of the DNA on the glove. Could it be body fluids rather than saliva or sweat or skin cells or something like that? So could it be body fluids or something on the glove? So I don't know why they asked him that question. The tipster was his girlfriend for 2 years.
The tip was given to Maurice by an ex-girlfriend of one of the men listed in the suicide note. When Maurice questioned this man about the letter, he told him he had no idea why his name was in there. He had no clue. The GBI supposedly asked him and the other men in the letter if they had ever had sex with Tara, and they were all swabbed for DNA. This was very confusing, because it seemed to imply that the glove was somehow linked back to Tara. The whole thing just gave me an uneasy feeling, and the whole nature of this thing and where it goes is honestly pretty uncomfortable to talk about. Is this the answer to solving the case, or am I just jumping down another rabbit hole? I knew that either way, this was an area I needed to tread very cautiously. Maurice gave me the names he knew from the list, and I've tried to reach out to them, but they've all ignored me. I decided to do some more research on the man who committed suicide. I hoped that maybe searching through his friends and background would turn up something, and it did. It turns out that this guy's brother was friends with someone I knew, and someone that you know too. I decided to pay him a visit in Ocilla, in person.
Dusty. How's it going, man? What's up, man? This is my friend Donald, by the way.
Dusty Vassy, the reporter from the Ocilla newspaper. He knew this guy's brother.
Did you have lunch or anything? No? Want to get some lunch or something?
Yes, go eat.
Cool.
Miss Diane, I'm going to eat lunch.
We went to one of the local restaurants for lunch. I had my friend Donald with me too. I liked Dusty a lot, but he had no clue I was going to ask him about this suicide. I hope it didn't catch him off guard too much.
We changed it to where y'all order here now.
Oh, okay.
But here's the menu if y'all want to look at it.
Okay, cool.
It's the same as up there.
Same as up there.
We sat down at the table, and I told him I wanted to ask about this person. To my surprise, he had a story of his own.
A friend called and said one of our friend's brother
was freaking out because the people that killed Tara Grinstead were trying to get him. This was, I want to say, probably 2007. And he said, what should we do? What should I do? And I was like, well, the police need to know. So I called and talked to, I believe it was Alan Morgan, was the deputy I talked to, and told him, just basically what I'd been told, which wasn't much, just that he was very upset and that there was something, whoever it was after him. And 3 years later or something, he committed suicide. I didn't know much about it at the time. It wasn't until years later, after you started the podcast, that I heard that he had left a note that apparently had indicated some people were involved in Tara Grinstead's murder.
You knew this guy, right?
When he was a kid, I knew him. I went to high school with his brother, his much older brother. And he told me more of something about the story, something about, it's been years, but something about, said he encountered somebody on a dirt road. I got the impression it was more than one person. And it somehow or another, they were connected to the death of Tara Grinstead. It's some really messed up stuff. This guy and another guy encountered the supposed killers, and they had supposedly a black girl with them, and they made them carve their initials into her and put their DNA on her so that they couldn't rat the other people out.
This was extremely graphic and terrifying. The uneasy feeling I was getting earlier came right back. I asked him what the police did that day when he was freaking out. What did they think about this?
Yeah, basically that he was just disturbed. Like there wasn't any truth to it. I've talked to his brother, and I actually talked to somebody who went to school with him, who both said that he had a wreck at some point with some other guy, which was, I think, on a dirt road. There's some speculation that maybe he had some damage from the wreck that may have contributed to this, because it was after the wreck that he started withdrawing from his friends and started saying all this stuff. I don't really know the extent of the injuries or anything like that, though, but just that these claims started coming after the wreck. He said, sometimes he would say things and it would seem crazy, and sometimes he would say things and it seemed like it would make sense.
This was one of two things, true or false. We know for sure this guy killed himself and left a note about Tara, but it's up to us to determine if there's any truth to it. As creepy and messed up as that story just was, I find it comforting that there might be an explanation for all this. And maybe that story, along with the context of the suicide note, simply just aren't true. Apparently this guy had been in a bad car wreck a few years prior to his suicide. And it was after that when his friends started noticing his weird behavior. He became more reclusive and began telling crazy stories about how he knew what happened to Tara, and that the person or the people responsible were out to get him. It seemed like whatever the car injury was, it had to be severe enough for someone to start acting like this. I am nothing close to a doctor, but my best friend Matt is a doctor. I wanted him to weigh in on this theory. Was this the behavior of a deranged person? Or somebody with a traumatic brain injury?
Remember how I was talking to you about the guy who killed himself and left that note?
Yeah.
I guess a few people told me that he got in a car wreck or something. Basically, ever since the car wreck, he wasn't acting right.
Yeah.
Like, is there any sort of injury that he could have sustained that would make him act like that all of a sudden?
Yeah, but it'd have to be like, or to have like a really like acute personality change, you have to damage like one particular part of the brain. The famous example, if you want to look it up, is this guy, Phineas Gage was his name. He was a railroad worker. And he set off a stick of dynamite and it blew up, and a piece of the railroad went flying up through the roof of his mouth and came out the top of his head.
Damn.
It didn't kill him. But he forever after that was a different person.
Oh, wow. I mean, how different? Like, how did he act?
I think he was angry. He's like just kind of deserted his family.
Gotcha. That's kind of how this guy was acting. Kind of deserted his friends and didn't really hang out with anybody anymore. Was real reclusive.
That's interesting. You would think it'd have to be like an actual like in the head injury, chronic concussive injuries, or a one-time, in the brain injury would make it more realistic that he would just kind of go off the rails, and you know what I'm saying?
So do you think it would be more likely that he would get in a wreck and, knock a screw loose in his head and start rambling off crazy stuff, or start telling the truth?
I mean, I think if anything, if he was in a car wreck that was particularly bad, I think it probably makes you contemplate life a little bit more, like especially like end of life stuff. And so maybe that brings out feelings of guilt from a psych perspective. But I don't know. I think if he was going to tell the truth, he was going to do it anyway. I don't think really the car wreck would send you off the rails, so to speak.
Right. Okay. But it's possible out there that he could have damaged something in his brain to where he just became simply a crazy person. I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, it's happened before. Yeah, it's definitely within the realm of possibility that has happened before. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it could happen.
Sometimes with a bad head injury, especially inside the brain, the person can undergo a complete personality change. The first famous case of this was the man named Phineas Gage, also known as the American Crowbar case. In 1848, this man was working on a railroad. A stick of dynamite went off, and a piece of the railroad the size of a crowbar went straight through his head, but miraculously, he survived. But from that point forward, he was forever a different person. He was angry and isolated, and he eventually started acting crazy. Could this be what happened to the man who committed suicide in this case? It's hard to determine for sure at this moment, but the explanation for his behavior seems plausible. The GBI investigated this thing too, and I guess they felt there was nothing to it. Regardless, even if the stories were true, the man who committed suicide never implicated who Tara's killer actually was. So in my opinion, it could have been anybody. It doesn't change who we're looking for. I want to take a second to thank everyone who's been supporting this podcast. In order to come back sooner than I planned, there's been several key people to help me do that. To redeem this
down. He claimed that Tara was not answering her phone, so he became upset because she would not respond. The Ocilla police were called, and Sergeant Sean Fletcher was one of the officers who responded to the call. Sergeant Fletcher noticed that another vehicle was parked in Tara's driveway, which may have been the real reason that Anthony became jealous after he saw the vehicle at Tara's house. At the time of the incident, no one except Tara knew who was in the house with her. It was later learned that the individual with Tara that day was Detective Heath Dykes, a detective with the Perry, Georgia Police Department. The day after the Vickers incident, Tara went to the Ocilla Police Department to get a restraining order against Vickers at Dykes' urging, because he told her the boy was apparently a nut and dangerous. Sean Fletcher was the Ocilla police officer who took the report. He would not give Tara the restraining order until she told him who the person was at her house that day. Tara didn't want to tell Sergeant Fletcher because she knew he was friends with her ex-boyfriend, Marcus Harper, and was afraid he would tell him. Fletcher assured her he wouldn't tell, but had to have the person's name to file the report. Tara told him it was Dykes, a police officer from Perry, Georgia. Marcus Harper was in Afghanistan at the time the report was filed. A couple of months after the Vickers incident, when Marcus came home, he angrily confronted Tara and told her about the entire incident, saying Fletcher had told him. Tara filed a complaint against Sergeant Fletcher at that time for telling Marcus about the incident after assuring her he would not tell, and he was suspended from his job and almost got fired.
Heath Dykes, the Perry police officer, was inside Tara's house on the day of the Anthony Vickers incident, and Sean Fletcher was one of the arresting officers that day. Sean Fletcher is the same guy Marcus Harper was riding around with in the cop car on the night of Tara's disappearance. It's a pretty strange thing. A circle of different persons of interest in this case, all involved in this little incident that happened 6 months prior to her disappearance. Tara asked Sean Fletcher to not tell Marcus Harper that Heath Dykes was in her house. The question is, why did Tara want to keep that a secret? Sean Fletcher broke protocol and told Marcus anyways. He almost lost his job over it. Shortly after Tara went missing, rumors ran wild about an affair she may have been having with Heath Dykes. Some people painted him as an innocent family friend, the guy who went to go check on her and left his business card. But some people claim that they were in a heated affair, and that there's much more to this story. Like I've said before, to solve this we need all the facts, no matter how small, insignificant, or uncomfortable they might be. So far, this idea that Tara and Heath Dykes were having an affair has just been hearsay. But if there was any truth to it, it would definitely change things.
Search crews just cleared out of this area right here off of Frank Satterfield Road about 20 minutes ago, and Captain Heath Dyke says nothing showed up on their search today. I just spoke with Sam's father, Christian Poss, about an hour ago. He says if nothing shows up on the search today, there's really nothing left to do except keep hoping and keep spreading the word about his son.
This is a local news report from Perry, Georgia. Heath Dykes is now the police captain in Perry. A quick internet search took me to this video. This is from 2 weeks ago.
There's a creek area that runs through this property that we've, it takes a little bit more time to get through it.
Dyke says every tip they've received has come up cold.
Maurice had the chance to interview Heath Dykes in person back in 2006. A friend of his, a former GBI agent, helped set it up.
See, I had the opportunity to interview him because their cousin, retired GBI, had briefly set it up. The thing is, she said that he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it on the weekends because his wife wouldn't allow him to leave, that she was like keep an eye on him, that he couldn't meet with me on the weekends because there was marital problems.
The in-person interview never happened. He was only able to do it over the phone. I asked him more about Heath Dykes being inside Tara's house on the day of the Anthony Vickers incident.
After that incident, she went next door to Joe Porter, the next door neighbor, and asked him could he park his car, his vehicle, next door so it would look like nobody was at her house. Heath was always there at the house.
After I made numerous phone calls to the Irwin County Sheriff's Department, they kept their word with me and finally sent me the dispatch logs from the night of Tara's disappearance. Marcus Harper's alibi involved multiple run-ins and stops with the man named Benny Merritt. There were no reports in Ocilla, and there were no reports at the county either. These dispatch logs are the very last place these Benny Merritt incidents could be recorded, and if they're not there, then Marcus Harper's alibi simply isn't true. Before we dive into these dispatch logs, I want to share an email that I recently received from a local in Ocilla. She told me that on Monday when Tara didn't show up for school, someone told her something strange and it always stuck with her. A man that her family knew, named Joe Hilton, told her and her mother at a restaurant after school that day that Tara was missing, and they think Marcus did it, but he knows it wasn't him because he was with him all night. That definitely sounded odd to me too. Who was Joe Hilton, and where does he fit into this alibi? I asked her if she could tell me this story over the phone for the podcast, and she did.
I was 15, and I remember the day that she didn't show up for school, and it was such a big deal in Ocilla because Ocilla was so small. And there's this restaurant in Ocilla called Peck's. That's where everybody went after school to, get a drink, do something to eat before you go home. So that's where we went, me and my mom and my brother. And at that point, I don't remember if we knew she was missing yet. But Ocilla was kind of crazy, just, people everywhere, cop cars everywhere. And when we were at Peck's, we saw Joe. And he said, Tara Grinstead's missing. They think it was Marcus, but it can't be him because I was with him all night. I don't know, it's just weird. It didn't sit well.
All right, and let me make sure I have the fax number for you. Okay. All right, give me just a minute and I'll get these sent through, okay? There's going to be about, give or take, 10 pages or so.
I got the dispatch logs, and I called Maurice so we could review them together on the phone.
Yeah, you have to look up there. It has the number. It says dispatch from 016, which is Fletcher, to D7, to D7, to D7. From time received is 16 minutes past midnight. And then at 0146, he's downtown. Okay, then I see 8 minutes past 2 o'clock. And that's to Apricot, 111 South Apricot. That's where Bernie Merritt lived at. That's Bernie Merritt's place.
So it looks like there is some truth to Marcus Harper's alibi. I saw it myself. There's 2 police calls for Benny Merritt, one at 2:08 a.m. and one at 2:49 a.m. Marcus said he left the White Horse Saloon shortly after 1 a.m. The bar is located in Fitzgerald, about a 10-minute drive to Ocilla. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, let's say he left at 1:15 in the morning. The latest he would be back in Ocilla to tag up with Sean Fletcher would be around 1:30 a.m. Upon a second glance, I noticed one glaring piece of information in the dispatch logs. These records have corresponding numbers for each officer on duty that night, so each officer that responds to a call is listed next to the incident. The first call for Benny Merritt was at 2:08 a.m., but Sean Fletcher wasn't there. Another officer was, Sergeant Kissling. On the second call at 2:49 a.m., Sean Fletcher was there. What this means is, the first and only time we can place Marcus Harper anywhere that night is at 2:49 a.m. So if he left the bar at 1:15, then where was he for almost 90 minutes?
It's just a weird time to do right along. And it's so suddenly. I mean, if he did this, then he did something temporarily. And then he had to do the alibi. Then he had to take care of the business later on the next day or whatever. If he did this, he did something fast and temporarily hid it, and then went back and took care of it as soon as he could. Because, see, he was with Joe Hilton Sunday night. It's just odd that he's riding around with these people Saturday and Sunday. But he was damn sure was with Joe Hilton. Joe Hilton told one of the people that Monday they had the vigil outside of her house. He said that they would never find her.
Thanks guys for listening to episode 7. Up and Vanished is now back in full swing. Next Monday there will be another case evidence episode, and the following Monday will be episode 8. Starting this week, after every new episode of Up and Vanished, I'll be hosting a live Q&A for our listeners. This week it'll be on Wednesday at 7 p.m. on Twitter. Just tag @UpAndVanished and ask your question using the hashtag AskPain. The Twitter handle is @UpAndVanished, and again, this is this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Also, if you're enjoying this podcast and would like to donate to the production, you can go to upandvanish.com/donate. For exclusive content, go to upandvanish.com. This week I'm posting the dispatch logs on the discussions page. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you next Monday.